We keep hearing that Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world less than 100 years ago, but not many point to the fact that Argentina not being in the same league as Western Europe, Canada, and the United States continues to be an anomaly to this day. When you look at the facts on the ground, it really takes a socialist to mess that up. The country has everything it needs in order to be very wealthy. It's huge in size, with fertile lands that produce enough food for 400 million people, despite only having 47 million inhabitants. Lots of talented tech entrepreneurs, some of the best universities in Latin America. And above all, the country is extremely rich in natural resources. Among those resources, we have vast reserves of oil and gas. YPF, Argentina's third largest company by market cap, is also the country's largest oil and gas producer. With a market valuation of about $11 billion, it has been the focus of lots of controversies over the past 3 decades. In order to understand how we got here, we need to get a quick overview of the roller coaster that this company has been on in recent history. At least on paper, this is a private enterprise whose largest shareholder is the Argentinian government, which owns 51% of its shares. But back in 1992, it was fully owned and managed by the state. The then President Carlos Menem, who himself was a quite controversial figure in Argentina's history, turned it into a private corporation. Its shares were sold in the New York Stock Exchange, under conditions that made it subject to arbitration in United States courts. This choice of jurisdiction made it quite attractive to investors, and private money poured in. It was during the period of 1996 to 2003 when peak oil production was reached, exporting natural gas to Chile, Brazil, and Uruguay, also exceeding 300,000 barrels of crude oil per day in net exports. Things started to change politically in 2004. This year marked a drastic change of attitudes from the government towards the energy sector. However, the private sector remained as the main player. Fast forward to 2012, the government barely owned 0.2% of the company, with its largest shareholder being the Spanish multinational Repsol. Repsol had been the source of a lot of criticism from the governments of Néstor Kirchner and his wife, Cristina Fernández, who accused the corporation of not honoring its investment commitments. Repsol defended itself, claiming that it had invested more than $20 billion into YPF, and added that it was the state that made things difficult for the company by freezing the sale price of oil and gas for populist reasons, thus forcing it to sell it well below market prices. Repsol complained that it was being forced to sell the unit of natural gas at a price 7 times lower than the market price, effectively disabling it from generating the revenue needed for reinvestments. Whether they were right or not, the fact remained that Argentina had gone from exporting oil and gas to importing them in order to satisfy its internal needs, mainly from Bolivia. This was great news for left-wing Bolivian President Evo Morales, but terrible news for the Argentinian state's budget. In retrospect, Repsol YPF signed its own death sentence the year before. In 2011, it announced that it had found one of the largest deposits of shale oil and gas in the world. The vast deposits in Vaca Muerta were a game-changer for the fossil fuel industry in South America. We were talking about 308 trillion cubic meters of shale gas and 22 billion barrels of shale oil. The government of then-President Cristina Fernández was salivating. Let's remember that after an abrupt and drastic drop in 2009, global oil and gas prices had been sharply increasing again. Cristina Fernández got dollar signs in her eyes. The die was cast, and the Peronist government of Argentina proceeded to expropriate 51% out of the 57% of the shares owned by Repsol. On April 16, 2012, President Cristina Kirchner announced the decision to expropriate 51% of YPF shares and sent the bill to Congress. Less than a month later, on May 7th of that same year, Congress approved the nationalization by majority vote. Repsol YPF was no more. For its shares, the Spanish multinational was paid $5 billion. The Argentinian state was sued and was eventually sentenced to pay $16 billion to other shareholders. But since Argentina filed for an appeal, that matter is still not settled. After the nationalization of YPF, the Argentinian government still needed the private sector's capital and expertise in order to operate Vaca Muerta. Ironically, the next year it signed a contract with Chevron, in which it practically gave this multinational everything it asked for. It even included some secret clauses which were only revealed after court rulings forced them to do so. After all the dust settled, the results were mixed. The Argentinian government had gotten back control of YPF, but it had also gotten itself a lawsuit. Moreover, it still needed to rely on a multinational corporation in order to exploit Vaca Muerta. In terms of its internal energy markets, everything got much worse. The country's imports of gas and oil went through the roof, reaching its historic high in 2015, Cristina's last year in office. The country wouldn't go back to having an energy surplus until January of 2024. As recently as last year, the country had an episode of acute scarcity of car fuel, provoked by the government's insistence on price controls, making it more attractive to sell crude oil to refineries in other countries rather than in Argentina. Cristina was followed by Mauricio Macri, a center-right president under whose administration Vaca Muerta's activity quadrupled. He opened tenders to build a pipeline to connect Vaca Muerta to other cities, but it was canceled by the following president. It wasn't until 2023, under the administration of Alberto Fernandez, that the country built the Nestor Kirchner pipeline. This piece of infrastructure expanded the country's gas transport capacity by 25% and allowed it to no longer need gas from Bolivia. Now enter President Javier Milei, the first libertarian president in the world, and he has big plans for Argentina's energy sector. Politicians have always known that in such complex industries, the state needs the private sector's capital and know-how, but they prefer to stir up nationalist sentiments when these fit their agenda. It's a fact that in order to develop Vaca Muerta, a boatload of cash is needed. Some estimates place these capital requirements between 37 and 60 billion. Extracting shale oil and shale gas is expensive and complex. Given that Argentina's access to credit isn't great, the state needs to lure in investors. The government had to send a signal to foreign and domestic corporations that the state would no longer expropriate their assets or change the rules of the game down the road. Lots of private corporations were already investing millions in Vaca Muerta, and many others had expressed interest. But since the goal is to hit 1 million barrels of oil per day, much more had to be done. As part of an omnibus bill to deregulate the economy, the so-called Ley de Bases, the state introduced an incentive scheme for large investments. In the words of its promoters, this program establishes incentives, certainty, legal security, and an efficient system of protection of acquired rights for holders of a single project with investments exceeding $200 million. Specifically, the regime offers tax, customs, and currency exchange incentives for 30 years in order to attract large investments. According to the new law, in addition to encouraging national and foreign investments, the program aims to promote economic development, develop and strengthen the competitiveness of certain economic sectors, increase exports of goods and services abroad, as well as generate employment, among other items. Among the benefits for projects that adhere to the new regulatory regime, there is the reduction of the income tax from 35% to 25%, expedite processing of other existing benefits, as well as zero tariffs on exports arising from these investments. This last item is quite attractive to commodity investors in light of Argentina's history of preventing local producers from reaching global markets in order to force them to sell their products internally at below-market prices. The tool that has been used in order to deter such exports is known in Argentina as retenciones. Under the new law, a corporation can sell goods internationally without having to worry about tax punishments from the government for doing so. Besides attracting foreign capital, the government continues to invest in crucial infrastructure to make Vaca Muerta live up to its potential, with more pipelines, terminals, and gas compression stations. Under the new legal framework, the country expects to receive $54 billion in new investment in the energy sector alone between 2024 and 2027. Multiple players have announced their commitment of vast sums of capital, most of it going to Vaca Muerta. YPF has pledged to invest $4,500 billion. However, the figure might vary due to its ongoing restructuring process. Vista Oil and Gas, an Argentina-based company, will be another major investor. Its president and CEO, Miguel Galuccio, has already confirmed that this year it will be $903 million and drill 47 wells. Plus Petrol, a multinational headquartered in Buenos Aires, has pledged to invest $861 million in its shale projects. Pan American Energy will be coughing up around $848 million. The company has already started 2024 with a drilling campaign. It expects to drill 38 wells. Tech Petrol has planned an investment plan of around $480.96 million, and a drilling campaign of 21 wells in New Can. Shell's investments in Vaca Muerta will reach $449 million with the goal of drilling 16 wells. Among the companies that are growing and making a name for themselves in Vaca Muerta are Chevron, YPF's partner in Loma Campana, with $313 million this year, and then Phoenix Global Resources with $132 million to expand New Can's shale operations to the north of the province. In addition, Total Energies will invest $246 million, Pampa Energia $238 million, and ExxonMobil $191 million. One has to say the change in legislation hasn't been the only magnet for investment in the country. Under the new administration, there's been a complete 180 in terms of rhetoric compared to previous Argentinian governments. Most of such administrations often viewed the private sector with suspicion, treating profit-making as almost morally wrong. Under the current leadership, generating revenue from selling goods and services legally is no longer unethical nor a form of robbery. On the contrary, it's commendable. But please let me know in the comments. What else can Argentina's government do to stimulate growth in the country's energy sector? What other developments in Vaca Muerta do you know about? This is Latinometry. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss our interesting videos about Latin America. Please like and share this video, and thanks for watching.